The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
This is the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author, and we are continuing our field trip in Miami-Dade County with a trip back to our friends at Beat Culture. But before we talk about that, make sure to follow us online. We are on social media at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter. You can find us on Facebook at FL Beer Blog, or search for FPN Insiders. That is our closed Facebook group for the Florida Podcast Network. If you're going to use a web browser, you can take a look at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com, FloridaBeerPodcast.com, or go to FloridaBeerBlog.com, where you can read an article from a couple weeks ago where I showed you the few beers that I was able to sample at this, my latest trip to Beat Culture Brewing in Miami. Now, Beat Culture founder and owner Alan Espino has been a great fan and supporter of the blog and the podcast. I have many, many beers of his that I need to write about, and so you'll be seeing those on social media and at FloridaBeerBlog.com. But we actually spoke to him about a couple of other different things, most notably hot sauce. Yes, you heard me right, hot sauce, because as Ellen talks about, he enjoys fermenting everything he can, and believe me, I did not realize that hot sauce can be fermented, and it's actually much better the way that they're making it. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about some new lines of beers that he has, and a bunch of other exciting things that are coming to Beat Culture. If you have not been, this is one of Miami's best breweries, and I definitely recommend that you go. If you do, tell them that I sent you. And on the drive there, you can go ahead and listen to the rest of this interview. So I will leave you with producer Steve and I chatting with Alan Espino from Beat Culture Brewery. So I kind of wanted to start off with something that you had messaged me some time ago, which I always kind of found interesting and sort of stuck with me, that you are obsessed with fermentation. And I know that you have a degree in microbiology. I will ask, which came first, the beer or the degree, and how did the one that you got first influence the one that came second?
Sure. So I was an undergrad, and I was destined to go to veterinary school. So I was in a veterinary curriculum. So all your organics, your micro, your bios, your chems, all that stuff, right? And then it was getting to my micro class with Professor Winkle, that once we reached the subject matter of aerobic and anaerobic respiration, which is, I guess, just a pretentious way of saying like fermentation, right? They got to the point of like yeast, and yeast could live in an oxygen rich and an oxygen deprived environment. It metabolizes differently. It produces different byproducts. It could procreate. It could not. So I'm like, I was just blown away. Like, wait, we're trying to study alien life and, sending space shuttles out and like trying to see if we could find aliens responding to signals. But while we have something just so complicated and just everywhere, right? Fruit growing on trees has wild yeast just, on the skin, waiting for the fruit to fall and the yeast to go and penetrate and go in there opportunistically. So I was just really blown away with that basic idea, being that I was studying a lot of micro already. And then wait, there's this organism that could also make alcohol from sugar and all. It was just a really amazing biochemical pathway as well, that I would just nerd out. I would read it. I would just look at it, study it, and it didn't feel like work. That's when school changed a lot for me. That it was a blast. I really enjoyed it a lot. So I could study all the time. It's like, imagine watching TV or playing video games where it's kind of like you're engaged all the time. Doesn't feel like work. That's what school was for me. And then at that point, that same professor talked me out of going into veterinary school. He said I was going to get bored giving puppy shots. And, also you get a little heartbroken in that industry because you typically lose a lot. But it's like, study something else. Go for a master's and figure things out a little bit more. And I took his advice.
So what kind of master's degree did you go for? How did that sort of help?
Sure.
Putting beat culture.
I think education is a great exercise. I don't know if it's necessary for everybody, right? MBAs are great. Do you need one to run businesses, to start things? Maybe not. Is it a shortcut? Possibly. So I do think academia is important, is necessary. Maybe not for everybody. I think really the discipline of just focusing, studying, finding things that you like, and willing to buckle down not only hours of your life, but years of your life to get something. I think that's really the important takeaway, because at the end of the day, I studied statistics. So, which it was good for research and development. I worked in diagnostics, infectious disease research, and congenital malformation, particularly in newborn babies. So doing these clinical trials and studies and spreadsheets and finding anomalies and all that, stats was important, but did I need it? Absolutely not.
So I guess how long was the period of time for when vet school was no longer a part of your vision to the point where you were at least fermenting alcohol, fermenting beverages of some kind?
Oh, I was doing that in undergrad. Yeah, I wasn't old enough to drink, and I was already doing that. It's just, again, you got to think of the time that it was like we had Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and Newcastle were the hot stuff, right? Because there was no breweries down here. There was nothing. And then sometimes, stuff will land down here. We'll find a Cantillon, randomly. And yeah, other than that, maybe some Chimay, your Belgian beers that typically have been settled up shop here for a while. I started brewing because I wanted stuff. I would see West Coast, I would see California, I would see Colorado with Oscar Blues. That was one of the first beers we made, actually, the Goodnight, which I don't think they make anymore. That was an Imperial Red. Came out terrible. And then there's this is cereal that I like. It's called Banana Nut Crunch. I wanted to make a Banana Nut Crunch beer. You put the cereal in it, had a bunch of preservatives. It was awful. So it was a lot of screwing up, but screw up quickly and then adjusting. And then I'm like, okay, this tastes good. And I really realized that I just like the process more than I like the product. I just find it so interesting. Again, unicellular organism doing its thing in different environments was just captivating.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because as you talk about different environments and definitely different products, now that you have Beat Culture, now that you've been established for a couple of years, you are branching out into a lot of products that I don't think any other brewery that I've ever seen in the country is going into. Obviously the last time that we were on the podcast, we talked about mead, your collaboration with Seba. I know one of the things that you have done in the past that you were going to hopefully start doing again in the future, knock on wood, is sake again. How different is that from making a beer, and are you going to start jumping into that ship again? Okay,
so let's start with the first part. Our mission statement was always all things fermentable, right? So if we could ferment it, I would like to at least try it and see if it works. And that's why in the beginning, hot sauce was just always in the horizon, because no one was hot sauce producers. Really, there's not a ton of them down here. A lot of them aren't really doing the true fermentation. Some of them add vinegar to it, which is fine. Those make great hot sauces. It's just when you ferment it, it does a very, very different profile. And really, if I could dabble into more things, I mean, chocolate is a different creature that has fermentation in it. A coffee has a little bit of that if you do a wet processing or natural processing. So I just find it all just amazing that we use an organism to make our food better. Even dry aging steaks, there's a component of enzymatic activities that's happening on there. That's pseudo fermentation, oxidation. So yeah, and then it was a natural transition with sake, where okay, this looks very difficult. Can I try to do it? But that was really it. Can we even attempt to try it? And we did. It was a small batch. I don't know if we'll make it again. It's an excruciating amount of work, right? Because we polish all of our rice down to about 50% of its original size. It's part of one of the requirements in Japan in order to get certain thresholds of and yeah, a lot of steaming, it's a lot of work. So we might make it again. I'm not going to say never, but it's in the near future, we might just be sticking to hot sauce beer and our honey wine line.
Awesome. And he definitely wanted to talk about the hot sauce, because I'm a big hot sauce fan. Steve, I don't know if you are a hot sauce person or not.
Not so much. My wife is, though.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And it was kind of interesting to see a hot sauce that is being fermented. I am not used to that. I think most people are just used to going to Publix and picking up a bottle of Crystal or Tabasco or some sort of shelf-stable liquid that's going to be eternal and will probably outlast us if the bottle isn't opened, after the nuclear winter. So I guess to start with, you growing up in a Cuban culture, hot sauce isn't necessarily a big part of that.
Yeah, it's not a thing at all.
Yeah, so
black pepper is spicy for like Cuban culture.
It's not to say that it's not flavorful. It's just not hot.
Sure. Yeah. I'm totally with you. But yeah, this is again, as you mentioned, I grew up in a Cuban household with traditional, Cuban culture, Cuban food. Hot sauce was never on there. But it took, getting older, trying these things, traveling and be like, oh man, this opens up another level of dimension to it.
It got started when you were traveling in Thailand.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
How, I guess, was that scary to jump into that, seeing as you hadn't really grown up in a household where heat was a big thing in food?
I don't know if it's scary to jump into it. I'm a curious guy, and I mean, traveling, and I do like education, right? So if you're curious and you do like learning, traveling is the best way to really fulfill those needs. And yeah, just having an open mind, being receptive. There's some that were, mentioned being nervous in Thailand that were just painfully, brutally hot. But at the same time, there were some that, balance, it's good, it's thoughtful, instead of just trying to make you cry just for the sheer pain of it.
Awesome. So with the hot sauce, what is fermented in this? How did you? I keep interrupting you as you try.
No, it's okay.
So I will ask this question so you can have another quaff of your streamline. You had sort of mentioned this. Basically, if you take a look at Tabasco, for example, it's pepper, salt, and vinegar, and that's it.
I actually think Tabasco is aged, but yeah. So a lot of times in hot sauces, you make a base, right? You put your vegetables, your tomato, if it's tomato base, if it's mustard base, whatever, and there's always an acidic version or compound added to it. That's your stabilizer, right? A lot of times you use vinegar, which is acetic acid. That's how you get that stability, and you get that nice bright pop that typically works in hot sauce. In our version, we use lactobacillus, and the acid that comes out of it is lactic acid. So it's a different flavor in acidity, and also it's that lactobacillus is eating some of that fruit, some of that vegetation that we have in there, and producing a much, much more complex product, right? So if you ever open up a lambic and you smell kind of like that funkiness to it, some of our hot sauce have that lactobacillus like funk to it, because it is fermented in a 4% brine. With typically it's tomato base, and then we add a lot of different variations of habanero, Fresno, different fruit depending on seasonality. Like this one's a watermelon Fresno. Cuban sofrito is a traditional sofrito base, which is green peppers, tomatoes, onions, garlic. And then we ferment that all together with lactobacillus. And then we drain out a little bit of the water so we get the right consistency, emulsify a lot up, and then it's ready to go.
Yeah, it's interesting that you started with the sofrito and not something that was inspired from your travels in Thailand when you first started developing this recipe. So I guess, why did you decide to start with the sofrito and not something, I guess, a little bit more fruity or a little bit more inspired by other traditional hot sauce flavors?
Mainly because this was just something immediate that I wanted to address, right? It's a perfect fusion of things that I like. If I could have Cuban food that's also spicy, perfect. Like, I think it's an amazing combo. I didn't see anybody doing it. I wanted it personally, and I thought it was kind of like a fun concept. And I mean, we had really good responses to it. Like, we sold out pretty quickly, and I really got to get to work and make more. But it's really that. It's just a hit close to home, right? It's these things that I've been wanting to do, and it's like it's our backyard. If I could address something like that, I would very much like to do it. And we got a positive response from it.
How difficult was it to develop the recipe? How long did it take? Because obviously you can buy books on the internet on how to brew beer, or have a beer making kit, but a fermented hot sauce, I doubt that.
There's no demand for that.
Well, not yet, at least.
You'll be surprised. There's some really good books out there, very, very good books, which I could share with you some titles that kind of gives you a baseline on if you're doing it in a brine, what level of brine should you use. You do want to, because it is fermented and it's a food stuff, you do really want to avoid, botulism, right? Because, that's never great with your hot sauce or anything. So there's different practices that you could do to help avoid all that. Next is, online is a great resource, asking other people that do it, finding network friends, just asking, reading, and then obviously doing it. And again, screw up. It's okay to screw up. Screw up often. The best way you remember, answers or questions that you got wrong in a test was the ones that you got wrong. So you screw up, you figure out what you did wrong, and then you tweak it, and it fits what exactly you're trying to do.
Now, obviously, you do have a full kitchen. You're doing meals, especially the meal that you just had a couple days ago, which I was sad to miss, unfortunately.
The Whistle Pig dinner?
The Whistle Pig dinner, yeah. And we can chat about that here in a few seconds. But since you have hot sauce, as you look at this particular product line for the future of Beat Culture, is it something that you're going to eventually have at every table when people are ordering food? Is it going to be something that you feature in the recipes that are coming out of the kitchen? What sort of culinary view do you see coming from this?
Sure. The hot sauce originally were just for guests that were dining in and they could get to try it. We eventually got FDA approval and proper labeling requirements in order to actually package it up and have a respective label and also to be able to sell it. Before we weren't able to sell it. So folks could come in, try it. If they like it, great. There periodically bottles would disappear, which I'll take it as a compliment, really. But, and then really that, I don't know if it's ever going to be embedded into the cuisine. Spicy food is polarizing. It's not for everybody. And sometimes you're just not in the mood for a spicy, which is fine. But yeah.
What about you? Do you like the pain?
I do. For some things, I think there's a time and place. Just the same thing. There's a time and place for a big stout or like if you're playing flip cup, I don't think you're going to be hammering down a double IPA. So my point is there's a time and place for it. And I think that's why we come around with a bunch of different styles, even fruit profile, level of acidity, level of heat, because there's an opportunity for it all, for sure.
That reminds me of a time that I played quarters with an Imperial Stout in grad school. It didn't end well.
Of course not.
I actually went over a wall that night.
I believe it.
So obviously, you are continuing to work on the beers. You have an amazing row of offerings. Steve, what are you drinking right now? I can't remember. It's gone.
Blueberry milkshake.
It was the blueberry milkshake.
It was delicious.
How was it? Excellent. And one of the things that I actually went for is something new that you had mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago, something that is starting to really gain traction in the craft beer industry, which was gluten-free.
That's right.
It's a gluten-free hoppy lager. It is a 7.8% gluten-free.
That's right.
What are you trying to do to me? Oh my God.
It's got a little bit of heat to it, yeah.
Yes.
But so we didn't want, it's not an IPL, but it is a lager. Sorry, it is a lager, really. We do cold fermentation, but during fermentation, we add an enzyme to it that it searches for gluten proteins in solution. And then that enzyme cleaves it so that it denatures it, and then it falls out of solution at the end of the day. So that's kind of what we try for that beer, that we wanted a beer that to be gluten-free without it tasting gluten-free, because there's a couple breweries out there that they might use sorghum or they might use other products that doesn't have a gluten in it. So what we do is same thing like a vegetarian meal. Like if you're vegetarian, but I want the meal to taste like there's meat, unlike the Impossible Burger. People say it tastes like a burger. I don't think so. So our goal was to be like blind test. It's gluten-free, like you wouldn't know unless I told you. And that was really our objective. And then some of our brands were actually going to try doing gluten-free versions of it, something like Fuacata, which is it's our mango passion fruit tart ale, that it could just be gluten-free and you'll be none the wiser.
Absolutely. And you're totally right, because with this, I don't really taste like anything's missing. It's just big, bold notes of the Citric Galaxy and one of my favorites, Eldorado hops.
Me too,
it's just big and bold and incredibly hoppy. And so how did you even decide to go down this route? This isn't something that seems to be a big thing in Miami. It's not something that you had done before in Beat Culture.
No.
What was the impetus behind creating a gluten-free?
It was mainly one of our friends of the brewery, Alejandro. He's from Munch, Miami, and he's always been a big beer guy. He got into mead because it was actually gluten-free. So that's where, man, I was just trying to be sympathetic. I'm like, man, you can't drink beer anymore. Like, good Lord. Like, it just must be, imagine if like tomorrow I can't drink beer anymore. I mean, you'll adjust because you have to, but like, all right, maybe there's something that we could do for him or other people that are in this situation that they like it, they crave it. No one is doing it. No one is doing it well, really, making it taste like beer. And yeah, we saw that as, all right, maybe we could do something to address those folks that have this want, this need, but no one's really executing it well.
And so if it is just the enzyme that you add to the beers, I guess what is stopping you from just making all the beers that you have gluten-free?
Sure. It's not ideal for all beers. It does take away a little bit of the body, right? And also it's additional time. It's additional expense. Not everybody knows how to drive that enzyme. The process is altered. If you're worried about creating large volume of beer, it might be just like a little kink in your system. And also some people just don't, it's not what they do, right? They make beer, right? If you're a bread maker, just keep making bread, which is also, but we take pride in being a jack of all trades. And it made sense that we would be the ones to try to do something like this.
And as always, listening and being interested in things. One of the things that you actually just mentioned to Steve and I when we came in that I was not expecting is in terms of, being a jack of all trades, being able to kind of appeal to the crowd and the industry and the people and the community that you have here. You sort of created the tart ale, which isn't quite as sour as the sour, but still has a little bit of that pucker. That was an interesting story as to why you decided to go the route that you did. Mm-hmm. So can you tell a little bit more about that?
Sure. It was trying to identify, first and foremost, what we like and what we think other people would like in this particular market. So we all know Berliners work well. Fermented sours, barrel fermented, inoculated sours work well. They could be polarizing as well. As I mentioned, same thing with hot sauce, that you could run the risk of folks trying it and then you lose them forever when they say, I hate it. Same thing with beers that are too bitter and are like West Coast IPAs in this market. It's not very well received. Really, the hazies work well because, again, not polarizingly bitter. And the same thing comes with these sours. So we wanted a beer that had this reference of sour, but not being overtly sour so that it's palatable for those that might not have ever tried a mango passion fruit beer before, right? Or that's just kind of experimenting or just used to Blue Moon or used to Stella. And it's kind of transitioning a big chunk of the Miami market, which is kind of non-craft beer drinkers into, all right, this is what beer can be. This is we make it here, local fruit, local folks, and we hope you like it. So it's an effort really to kind of get more people excited about beer without kind of damaging their perspective.
And it gives you more steps on educating. You have something that you can go to that's not quite as sour, but it gives you that little baby step into everything else.
Exactly right. Yeah. So it's wheat based. So it's not quite a wheat and it's also not quite an overt sour. So it's just, dialed back just a little bit, typically with fruit added into it.
And how has the reception been?
It's been great. Yeah. Especially when we started packaging a lot more when COVID started, the response has been good. And it just kind of changes perspective, right? Like mango and passion fruit in a slightly tart ale. Some folks think it's like a cocktail and a can. Like, no, it's beer. And their eyes open up like, what? So that's where our market is really, Miami. We're in our infancy as far as craft beer consumption and breweries destination wise goes. But it's really, it's always education. It's never a light switch really. When you come up with something, you have a line out the door as soon as you make it and kind of letting folks know, one day at a time that this is what beer could be.
That's amazing. You've got so much going on. What's coming next?
Oh man. So next we'd like to just create a lot more beers, right? So as I mentioned earlier, that our seasonality is practically monthly. So we rotate a lot of new brands very, very often. So we keep our true, tried and true, our social club, our Vamoose, our Saki-san on, while we dabble with fruits that are in season. If fruits aren't in season, we're not going to be making a beer out of it. So fortunately, we team up with some great farms. If you know Berry Farms down in Redlands, they supply us with really outstanding strawberries. For example, our strawberry margarita beer that we just, even like local chocolate roasters, Cal or Coffee Guys, Perla, they're always making new blends, new roasts, new something. And then that also kind of fuels us as well. Our honey guy is fantastic. He's a native guy. He's always tinkering. We just got some blueberry honey. Yeah. Which is just, it's bonkers good. So like it's just the opportunity and the inspiration is boundless, really. When you're thinking about things all the time, you find inspiration in just about like anything. So yeah, we're kind of obsessed with what we do. So we never run out of ideas.
As much as I hate to say it because it involves coming down to Miami, you are one of my favorite breweries in the state of Florida. So
thank you.
Keep up the good work and we will probably be back soon.
Most definitely.
Thanks, guys.
Hey there, fellow Florida beer enthusiast. We now have an official Patreon. In case you are unfamiliar, Patreon is a great way for a community to support the creators of the content you love, like the Florida Beer Podcast. If you're enjoying the content we bring you on this show or any of the shows on the Florida Podcast Network, you can help ensure that content keeps coming through for a small monthly donation equal to the price of a couple cups of coffee a month. So for just a few lattes, you can make a real difference. And the first goal of FPN's Patreon program is to help me get a better mobile setup to use whenever I can start traveling to great breweries here in the state of Florida. So if today's episode brought you valuable insights and information, please help see that these episodes keep coming by becoming a patron. Head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network to support the show, and it comes with some pretty sweet benefits. Want access to bonus extras? Nostalgic for these old school radio shoutouts? Lover of good quality merchandise? Well, not only will your monthly contribution help me grow the show, but you'll get some cool stuff in return. So please head to patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network for further details to become a patron. That's Patreon, patreon.com/Florida Podcast Network. You can also find the link right there in the show notes or by visiting FloridaBeerPodcast.com. Thank you in advance for your continued support. And that is it for my latest trip to Beat Culture. It's not going to be the last. It definitely cannot be because of all the amazing things that he's got going on. Keep an eye on our social media and you'll be able to see when we're there next and see what we are trying from Beat Culture. Thank you so much to Alan for your hospitality. We do appreciate it. Next week is going to be our last on-site episode in Miami-Dade County, where we go to one of their older, well-regarded, but still out-of-the-way breweries. That is Legacy Caribbean Craft Brewery.